Good evening. I want to welcome you all to the NAACP Dallas BE Informed, where politics and education meet. My name is Mia Street. I am formally now the educational co-chair for the Dallas NAACP. I'm also an educator of 20 years. And one of my projects we're working on now is a project called Sister Syllabus, where we are looking to tell the stories of women of color in education. I really appreciate all of those that were able to log in tonight. I want to welcome you all and encourage you all to support the NAACP by either joining your local chapter or donating. And let's get started with introductions first. Let's start with Dr. Bullock.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having me, Mia. My name is Dr. Ronda Bullock. I am the co-founder and lead curator at a nonprofit organization called We Are. We Are stands for Working to Extend Anti-Racist Education. At We Are, we provide anti-racism training for children, families, and educators. We use a three-pronged approach to dismantle systemic racism in education and beyond by offering summer camps for kids in rising 1st through 5th grade, professional development for educators, and workshops for parents and families. And I'm zooming in from Durham, North Carolina. I have a PhD in education, policy, critical race scholar, and I do critical whiteness studies specifically, and I study white children's racial identity construction. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Let's go on with Dr. Goggins.
Good evening, everyone. And again, thank you, Mia, for this opportunity. My name is Lathardus Goggins II. I am the owner and principal consultant for Applied Academic Solutions. It is a private consulting company that focuses on providing consultancy and professional development around social emotional learning, identity development, academic achievement. I'm also the publisher and owner of St. Rest Publications. We publish media that focuses on authentic identity development. And I am currently serving as the education chair for the Akron NAACP.
Thank you so much. And soon to be Dr. Grice.
Yes, I'm trying to be like Dr. Bullock when I grow up. So thank you guys for having me. My name is Solandra Grice, and I'm a former educator, an equity education consultant, and the founder of Conscious Education Consulting. We also provide professional development for teachers in schools and culture responsive, equity-based teaching practices. I am also the author of the book, The Conscious Educator, Becoming Culture Responsive Teachers in Schools, and the upcoming book, Embrace, Empower, Educate, and Include, Principles of Equity for Conscious Educators in Schools. I am a PhD student at the Texas A&M University in College Station, among a myriad of other projects and jobs that I have, but I'm super excited to be here and hope that I can contribute to the conversation as best as I can. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And soon to be Dr. Davis.
Good evening. My name is Aisha Davis, and I serve on the Texas State Board of Education. I represent both Dallas and Tarrant counties. I've been on the board since 2018. One of my biggest accomplishments in my first term was passing African American Studies last year. And I'm really, really excited about this conversation because I want to make sure we protect the integrity of that course and every single course that our students are taking in Texas public schools. So thank you again so much for inviting me and having this conversation.
Thank you so much. And we are joined by Councilman Thomas, and I will let you take it from here.
Great. Mia, I want to thank you for you and your team putting this phenomenal panel together. My name is Casey Thomas. I serve on the Dallas City Council. I'm soon to be term limited. I'm starting my last term on Monday on the Dallas City Council. I chair the Workforce Education and Equity Committee. I also serve as vice chair on the Real Council, which is Racial Equity and Leadership Council for the National League of Cities. And so equity and racial equity is something that's been a priority for mine. One of my greatest accomplishments on the council is we passed unanimously a resolution on racial equity 15-0 to show that the city of Dallas is putting racial equity absolutely at the center of our programs and our policies going forward. And so it is my honor and pleasure to moderate this esteemed panel. And so I'm not going to delay. I'm going to jump right into it. We have a lot of educating to do. In my past career, I was a teacher. I spent 15 years in the classroom. So education is critically important. And there's been a lot of miseducation around critical race theory and the real attack on critical race theory. And so those who are joining us through Zoom, those who are watching online, those who will watch the recording, I promise you this is something you will watch over and over and over again. This is one of the most important topics next to the attack on voting rights that's going on in the state of Texas and in the United States. And so we are right where we need to be. We're going to go ahead and begin with our first question. Critical race theory at the fundamental level is an academic framework that allows us to examine policies and laws that uphold systematic racism. How do you define it? Also, please share what you know of critical race theories, early origins in the 70s, and how have we seen this CRT movement transform? Let's start with Dr. Bullock and Dr. Goggins.
Yes, thank you. So a lot of people don't know that critical race theory stemmed out of critical legal studies. So some of the early scholars found that, as they're studying law, race is not being talked about. Race is not included and racism is not being included. So founding scholars such as Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw and Delgado are co-created this or created, this framework for understanding how racism is structural. It is a social construct and it is embedded, it is systemic and endemic to our society because it's embedded in laws and policies. And a lot of people don't understand, well, some people will argue there is no systemic racism. And it's like, no, you don't understand that by systemic, we mean in laws and policies. And we cannot debate that there weren't laws and policies in our country's history. And so what CRT does is provides this framework for ensuring that in any type of structural analysis that we use, we center race and racism. We understand that it's present. It's an attempt to de-center whiteness and to center marginalized communities and their voices, to count our experiences as knowledge, when oftentimes and historically it has not been counted. And one of the things I like to say about CRT is that it makes visible the invisible. Oftentimes racism is so normalized that people can't see it, you don't notice, you think it's just the way it is. But having that critical framework requires us to bring racism, power, and the intersectionalities of our different identities into our analyses.
Yes, and so thinking about critical race theory, as has been stated, it is often given credit or coined from the early work of Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw and others out of the 70s. But I would argue that we could even go back further than that, right? So the formal academic formation and the coining of the phrase critical race theory comes out of that work. But you have way early, 1882, George Washington Williams detailing the history of the Negro people in the United States, detailing the laws from 1619 to 18, I believe it was 1880, of each law coming into place that helps to define the status and the position of Black folks, the African in the United States, right? And this is if I remember correctly, 2-volume, close to 792 pages of detailing laws coming in, right? So, and when we think about what a law is essentially a codified norm. So important that we want to make it, we want to write it down. And so at the essence of what critical race theory is looking at the social construction of race, racism, power, privilege, that supports, in the case of the United States, white supremacy, and in particular, white male dominance, right? So the current discussion about what critical race theory is, I find, like I said, any reasonable person can't deny the existence of race being one of the fundamental things to shape the American identity. So any discussion of history, any discussion of any social event, phenomena in the context of the United States, you have to put at the center of it, or at least a critical lens, critical thinking through this idea of race. Otherwise, it is incomplete. It is just not a very good examination of that phenomenon.
Thank you both very much. Ladies, would either of you like to chime in on that?
No, I mean, I don't know what else I could add to that, because those are very succinct and clear definitions. Absolutely. So I appreciate them laying that out and making it in very layman's terms, because we know that critical race theory is very dense. And so even the fact that we have to break it down and talk about it is kind of bizarre, because it's like, of all the things that you guys could have focused on, these are the terms that you want to start breaking down. So I appreciate you guys really making it clear for everyone on what we're actually talking about.
Excellent. Our next question is for you, Ms. Grice. What would you say are the main misconceptions of critical race theory, and why is it under attack?
So because I have the pleasure of working so closely with Texas teachers and administrators in my equity work, I get this question a lot. And so two major things always stand out for people, especially now that social media has kind of run amok with, attacks on critical race theory. But one thing that me and a lot of the professors at Texas A&M talk about is that critical race theory is not being taught in K through 12 schools. Like, this is not what we do. So like, that's our first reaction. Like, what are y'all talking about? We don't do that. Where they do that at? So we first have to make that distinction. It's not being taught in K through 12 schools. Now, what is being taught and what we are trying to do, and what CRT informs, is our culturally relevant pedagogy. It informs our culturally responsive teaching practices, our equity pedagogies, our culture sustaining practices, any kind of buzzword that you hear right now, culturally responsive or culturally relevant teaching and pedagogies. That's what it informs. And that's what we're doing in K through 12 classrooms and schools, right? We're focusing on those practices. And yes, part of those practices is allowing teachers and students to better understand systemic and institutional inequities so that they can better understand the world that they live in and make the whole kumbaya world a better place, right? And so that's one of the big misconceptions, right? It's not being taught, but it does inform our culture responsive and our equity efforts that we are actually doing in our classrooms and schools. The second thing that I have to kind of talk teachers off the ledge on is that any kind of critical or equity work, particularly critical race theory, asks students or encourages students to hate white people and hate America. So we know that stems out of fear and all things fragility, but that's a different topic. And so I, again, have to reiterate what we're talking about here, right? if you have to understand narratives, right? And we know that the long-standing narrative in America is that we are an exceptional country. We have this steady stream of progress. It's all good in the hood, and race is in the past. And look, Barack Obama was president, case closed. What are y'all talking about? But again, like you said, if any reasonable person who has any kind of historical knowledge on any kind of policies, you know that that's not true, that we do have some rocky foundations that are race-based, class-based, gender-based, and they did set up privileges and disadvantages for different groups of people based on their identities. And that still continues today. Not so blatantly, but we still know that there are implications for a lot of the policies like we talked about earlier with the voting rights stuff. We know who that disproportionately impacts, and that's not by accident. And so if we are educators, right, and we are actually trying to make sure we have an educated society where people can think critically for themselves, make decisions, right, and go into society and do that as well, then we really have to break from that whole love of country, love of state, America can do no wrong narrative, and we really have to start embracing that critical aspect, that scary word, critical, right? If you criticize anything, automatically you hate it, but that's not exactly what that means. Criticism is not hate, right? It's just a closer examination, but therein lies the problem. We don't want people to be able to closely examine why their neighborhoods are the way they are, why their schools are not funded equitably. They don't want you to know why their teachers don't have the qualifications that they have, why their school lunch programs are the way they are. They don't want the average American to be able to actually stop and think about why things are the way they are. And so as long as we keep letting the status quo be and continue in the tradition of American exceptionalism, which America has made progress, right? We can't deny that, but we're not quite where we need to be. And so as educators, I hope that we can continue to push back, because I know a lot of teachers are scared, right? Because we need our jobs. And so I hope that we can have a united front, become better informed ourselves, like we are today, about what we're actually talking about, what it actually does, what we're really trying to do, and make a united front with like-minded parents and even those who aren't, and say, hey, I thought that we were here because we wanted to educate all students. I thought that we were here because we actually wanted to make the world a better place, or make things better, at least for ourselves and our own children. And the only way that we can do that is by actually looking at our systems and our structures in our classrooms and schools, studying them, analyzing them, critiquing them, and then figuring out solutions to the problems that we see today. But as we know, that's not the business for some folks. They know that the status quo is working in their favor, right? Governor Greg Abbott knows what he's doing. This is not by accident. And so I hope that, you know, we can take this panel discussion back into our classrooms, and teachers can become empowered to stand up for, especially because we've got those curriculum changes coming up in social studies in Texas. Hopefully we can take all this information and actually make sure that we have standards in place that actually teach and educate students so they understand their history and our society. It's not going to take away from their love of country. If anything, we're going to love our country more if we are able to make the positive changes that we hope to see. But let me stop, because I'm going to start rambling.
Well, I tell you, in the words of the great philosopher Nelly, it's getting hot in here. So I hope those who are tuning in realize this is sacred space. We have some scholars who are very knowledgeable in this space on critical race theory, and we got the best of the best at the table tonight. I promise you, this recording will be viewed over and over and will be shown, hopefully, in high school and college classrooms. So thank you all. Would anyone like to chime in on that? No problem at all. I got more for each one of you. All right, so our next question, and we're gonna go right back to you, Ms. Grace. Along with fear of critical race theory, is the fear and misunderstanding of our sister Nicole Hannah Jones' 1619 Project, which I listened to her podcast, all 5 of the parts to it, and it was phenomenal. Would either of you like to share, and I'll start with you, Ms. Grice, a brief synopsis of 1619 Project and how it relates to critical race theory?
So 1619 Project does exactly what the framework of critical race theory intends to do, is to shape that lens that race is central, right? Racism is part of our foundations, and exposes it for what it is, and informs what we're trying to do and why society is the way it is. And so that's where that backlash from the 1619 Project comes into play, because it centers slavery for what it is, right? It is the backbone for why the United States became a global economic power. I mean, cotton was king for a reason. And so you can't dismiss the centrality of the institution of slavery in the founding of America's history. You just can't do that. Even if you want to look at any kind of founding document or any kind of founding father, you're still going to find language which specifically states what the purpose of slavery for, who was supposed to be enslaved, for how long, why, and why other people cannot be. And so it's very interesting, the willful ignorance around trying to deny that these are our foundations, right? And again, against critical race theory, these are not aberrations. Like, this is what we do. We're America. The Germans learned from us. They didn't get, Nazi Germany didn't come out of thin air. They looked to Black codes and Jim Crow laws and everything that we were doing to make sure that our citizens were suppressed and repressed, and that we maintained our racial hierarchies. And they did the same thing, right? Just a little bit quicker. And so I wouldn't leave time for some other people to chime in, but basically 1619 Project really puts a spotlight on our original sin, and doesn't run from it. And we know that lots of folks like to run from that original sin and act like it isn't what it is. And so it is a blatant attack on those white supremacist powers that continue to have a hold on us. And they said, no more. We're going to bring it to the forefront.
Awesome. With someone else, I see Dr. Bullock, you've unmuted yourself. You'd like to chime in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in to say that in addition to land, like that idea of racism being systemic and endemic, the 1619 Project also pulls us forward to now see how those laws and policies from then are showing up now. And so I'm thinking about in how she talks about the medical field and healthcare, and how these laws and policies and Black folks' inability to trust the healthcare system based off of systematic mistreatment impacts whether or not we go to the doctor, whether or not we live or we die. And if you bring that into COVID, a lot of Black people died in their homes, right? Rather than go to the hospitals, because first of all, they were told, if you're not that sick, don't go. Right. And so getting all these different messages. So she also traces it to and brings the impact of those laws and policies to how they're still impacting us today. And with the case and thinking about the farmers and farmland and really making visible how strong white supremacy is. White supremacy is systematic. Oh my gosh. And when you're thinking about the case with the farmers, and it's been a while since I listened to it, so I don't have all the details, but the current case with one of the Black men who was dealing with, it wasn't just like working with farming and the government laws, it was the banker, it was the people cutting loans, it was the neighbor down the street, it was the people at the post office. All of these different systems were conspiring to keep Black farmers down and to suppress Black farmers. So it wasn't a one-off. And in listening to the whole series, it helps you to better understand white supremacy is a web. It is a web of power. right? And so while in certain cities, you may have a Black superintendent and a Black sheriff and a Black DA, and you think, oh, Black people post-racial in this place. No, that there is no Black supremacy. White supremacy is everything. It's healthcare. It's who's over the law system. It's who's teaching in the classrooms. It's all of these things. And white supremacy can be present even if Black and brown folks are in all of those positions. Right. And so what I think that 1619 Project does is makes visible how pervasive white supremacy is, from rooted in the foundations, what Sister Grice shared, and then brings it forward to it's still here. The impacts are still here. So those laws and policies still have an impact to this day, a cumulative impact, right? Black and brown folks and Black farmers particularly are still fighting for land. White folks are still coming in and taking Black folks' lands today. They are still coming in with eminent domain and putting highways through Black people's land that they lived on. Y'all see High on the Hog? Episode 2, okay? These things are still, and what I feel like 1619 Project, aside from just being so educative, is beautiful. Beauty is a problem. It's a nuanced word to use because it's horrific, right? But how the story is told and it's so clear and it's so specific, and how it's strung together, it's just powerful, and people don't want the truth, and it is full of the truth.
Excellent points. Excellent points. You know, the thing about the 1619 Project and the attack on the 1619 Project, well, what they were not aware of is those right-wing, far right-wing conservatives who've been attacking and putting legislation against it. What they've done is they've caused people to want to learn more about the 1619 Project. So it's worked the reverse order, because people are like, now, wow, what is the 1619 Project? And I thought it was amazing when the sister was considered for tenure and they decided, you know what, I don't know, 1,619 students, faculty, and others came together and said, we demand that this sister be given tenure as a professor here in North Carolina. Dr. Bullock, I know you wanted to back that up.
I did. I want to say I got the paper right here, and we're in there. I'm in there. We're in there, because that's my alma mater. That's it. I got to put it in a frame.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, who would have thought in this moment we would be able to have someone whose name is in print, will go down in history as a advocate for making sure that this sister gets a fair chance to be a tenured professor at this college or university. I tell you, we're just going higher and higher and higher. At this time, we're going to transition to our other elected official that's on the panel. As was stated, soon to be Dr. Aisha Davis, State Board of Education member, my state board member. Thank you for your service. And you are for re-election. We want to make sure you get re-elected. So, Board Member Davis, walk us through your role as a State Board of Education member in terms of driving the work to make sure students are getting an inclusive education. For example, the recently passed Black History course, thank you so much for that, and the Mexican American History course.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I definitely want to make sure we did have that African American Studies course available, but I was also a teacher before I ran for the board. I taught science, and we didn't have any figures of color that we had to teach our students. It was a couple of teachers that we really went deep to find those characters and those figures who reflect our students, but it's not required. Right now in the state of Texas, a student can graduate from high school, starting in elementary school, and be required to only know about 2 Black scientists the entire time they're in Texas public schools, George Washington Carver and Mae Jemison, and that's all. And that's extremely unfortunate. So my role, what I'm doing, is making sure that we have representation on the committees that decides what that curriculum should be. Right now, we are looking at science. And right now, we are making sure we have way more Black and brown scientists that we are infusing into those TEKs. Same thing in math. In math, students won't learn about a single Black mathematician the entire time they're in Texas public schools. Not only will they not know, 2 years ago, the state of Texas decided that Benjamin Banneker wasn't even worth being in history courses, and they proposed streamlining him. So now you have a Black mathematician who's really influenced a lot of what we do today in math, that a committee came together and said he wasn't important enough to be included in Texas curriculum. So that's why we have to make sure when those committees form, it's folks that look like us that are on them. Otherwise, you're going to consistently see this whitewashing of all of our courses, not just history, all of our courses, to the point where you won't see any representation. So I'm always saying, hey, if you have expertise in science, join the science committee. Math, join the math committee. But we have to make sure that we are there sitting at that table. And you don't have to be a teacher to be at that curriculum committee. You just have to have some expertise, and you just have to care about it. And there's a process where you just fill out an application, you say what your interests are, your board member selects you, and then you're there at the table. And you have an opportunity to make sure that our students get a diversified opportunity. So that's what I do on the state board. That's what I'm attempting to do. Like I said, right now we are working with our science adoption. After that, we do start with history, the end of this year. And those new laws, those new rules, they will affect exactly what we have to do. But again, we have an opportunity to make sure we have folks at that table. And we just got to make sure that we show up and that we make sure our voice is loud and is heard.
Well, you said something that caught my attention. You said your state board member, when you talked about those committees, talk a little bit more about that, because that's where we've got to engage more of our members of our Association of Black Scientists, mathematicians, historians. Talk a little bit more about those committees and how people can get on those committees.
Absolutely. So there are only 2 Black members of the State Board of Education, myself and my colleague Lawrence Allen in Houston. And so between the 2 of us, we're always trying to make sure that we have somebody there at the table. So again, right now we're doing science. We have history coming up. After that is math. And if you go to the Texas Education Agency website, you'll get an update of everything that the State Board of Education has going on. And there you'll see little links to go to those applications. And I also do send those out in weekly newsletters. So reach out. I'll put my email in the chat. Shoot me an email if you would like to be on my list. But that's the way that you get that information. And believe me, it's not a lot of folks who know about curriculum committees. It's not a lot of folks that know about the opportunity, and that is by design. Since I've been on the board, the majority of the folks have been white on almost all the curriculum committees, almost all the committees that determine what's on the STAR exam, that determines what on teacher certifications, everything. But yet you need those folks to be able to have a perspective where they can serve each and every student. So if you have a teacher certification exam, you need to make sure that teacher understands cultural responsiveness. So that's why it's so important to be at every single table when all of these decisions are being made for education.
Thank you very much. My next question for you is, we see this growing trend of politicians nationwide creating legislation that's designed to erase contributions of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian people. In Texas, we have House Bill 3909 and Senate Bill, I think 3979, and Senate Bill 2202. Would you please describe those bills and explain why these bills, or why bills like them are so harmful to students in Texas?
Sure. So House Bill 3979 is a nightmare. It's a total nightmare. I will say the one saving grace is that it affects social studies courses. So it's not going to affect African American studies right now because it's not considered one of those core courses. But it is going to affect every single core course in history. There's a lot of bad pieces to that bill. One of the bad pieces to the bill, it says that we cannot ever say that the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, any of the founding documents we cannot say that that perpetuates racism in any form or fashion. We can only say that the founding documents and founding principles gave liberty and justice to all. And that's the romanticized story that we have to teach children according to this law. This is what the law would say. Also, a lot of you guys have talked about the amazing professional development that you offer. If this law passes how it is, no school district can require that their teachers take professional development that would teach about cultural responsiveness, or that would put a responsibility on making sure that students of color receive a better opportunity to grow. A district wouldn't be able to do that. And if you are a nonprofit and you wanted to come in and say, hey, I'll pay for this training to make sure the teachers will have it, this bill outlaws that as well. So you cannot donate any money. You cannot be a private entity whatsoever and give money to a school district to make sure that some sort of cultural training takes place. You can't do that anymore. You cannot donate any money to a classroom to make sure that students can take a trip to the African American Museum. You can't do that anymore. You cannot give any outside funds to support these causes. Also, you cannot require any type of understanding of the 1619 project. And some of these folks that wrote this, they're so upset about it, they didn't even take the time to figure out what it is. Right now, with African American studies, the way it's written, we start with us being kings and queens and engineers and doctors and everything in Africa. And then it talks about that journey and then how we are still fighting for, you know, equity today. So it takes kind of those principles. You know, when we came here, that's when America really started, because we were the foundation. We began building a lot of the buildings. We began the culture that's still, that a lot of folks still, you know, go by today. So we would have to change the narrative to say more of, okay, well, Africans came here. We were so grateful for these founding documents, and it made us, you know, these citizens. And that's the romanticized story that we would have to tell students. And then a tricky part in there, and I want to read this, how it exactly is. It says in there that you cannot cause discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any form of psychological distress on white students on account of a student's individual race. So you would have to learn how to be super sensitive so that you're not teaching this in a way that any white students would feel any kind of way about it. And also you would have to learn how to teach this from a balanced manner. So you would have to start talking about all the great things about slavery. And you would have to have students start talking about it as if it was just this positive transaction, you know, and you have to get away from brutality behind the truth. So when I say whitewashing, this bill pretty much does it. And it's scary. Right now it's sitting on the governor's desk. It has not been signed into a law. And that's scary. When it went through the House members were able to put in some very strong language that said, okay, you do have to talk about white supremacy. You do have to talk about Native Americans. You do have to talk about Martin Luther King. You do have to talk about those. And at the very end, James Tallarico, he did an awesome job making sure that that bill was going to stay or it was going to die, but you weren't going to take all of those good things out that the House put in. Well, then the Senate said, you know what are laws? We're going to just waive them. And they signed it and gave it to the governor anyway. And it's sitting on the governor's desk. So now a lot of the chatter in the education field is he's not signing it because he wants it to go back to the Senate so they can strip it of all of the good stuff that the House put in. So it's still a fight. We still have a chance to work on this bill. When special session is called in July, we have to be very, very in tune. When there's opportunities to go down there and testify, we got to get ready. We got to show up and show out. But this will be the absolute last opportunity we have before this bill comes into a law and the State Board of Education has to rewrite history starting in November.
Wow. You know, that insight was critically important because we've heard a lot about these bills, but from a policy standpoint, given that insight was critically important for us as far as activists, as far as community leaders and things of that nature. I'm going to come back with a follow-up action because we're talking NAACP, action organization. I'm gonna come back, but I want to hear from Dr. Goggins. Would you like to chime in on that?
Yes, yeah, I got so much stuff running through my head right now because I just read that and it was talking about the discomfort. And what immediately came to mind was, so you're not going to talk about World War II? That would be discomforting. You're not going to talk about the Vietnam War, Korean War. You're not going to talk, what conflict?
The Holocaust.
The Holocaust, right. What conflict is there that you would be able to talk about that wouldn't be discomforting to some student anyway, right? So at some point, you're like, how do you teach history at all with this law, not just including Black folks, but just history in and of itself, in which you're saying that discomfort becomes a disqualifying criteria for talking about it. So that's baffling to me. That just bottom line. The other thing, going back, I got so much stuff, I apologize, but the idea of critical, right? So there's a very important part to this. Yes, it is essential to culturally relevant teaching and perspectives, but it is this idea of critical just important to thinking, right? Because at what point do you, because I've heard people talk about, well, it's critical, they was trying to connect it to Marxist ideas because it's critical. They're like, no, so using that logic, you're saying that we take critical thinking out of education? So at what point is it? And so you get back to this notion, and Mia, you reminded me of the post earlier. What becomes fundamentally the fear, right? And so reminds me of two quotes from one from Carter G. Woodson: "If you control a man's thinking, you need not worry about his actions," and we know the rest, right? And then James Baldwin's: "If I'm not the person you say that I am, you're not the person you think that you are," right? And so when you take those two quotes, this idea of critical thinking, because typically, and we've heard about it, is we tend to teach history most basically in this from American trope to iconography to trope to iconography, with no real critical examination of the nuances and the things that go into it. And particularly then, if your identity and your sense of who you are is based on this fairy tale, then you don't have the security, you don't have the sense of efficacy necessary to exist in a world not as you describe it, because your whole identity is on sandy ground, right? And so, and that's the issue at the end of the day, right? Because if the world is not as I described it, then I'm not the person in the world I think that I am, and I'm too insecure to believe that I can exist in the world as it might be. And so you get this type of heightened anxiety that comes across. I was talking to somebody earlier. I like back, because this stuff is not new. So back in the day, Bill Bennett, and I keep on forgetting the guy's name, but the guy, the bell curve, Charles, somebody, whoever he is, at least they try to put together some cogent arguments. This stuff that's going on now is just silly. It doesn't even hold water using their own logic. And so, but it comes out of this fragility of identity that is wrapped in and built on these falsehoods and these tropes and these tropes, right? So that's at the core. You when you hear with them talking and these folks who are doing this talk, they're talking out of a sense of fear. They're counting on the folks that they're talking to not to actually engage and to read for themselves. They're and it just becomes very problematic. And I think the more that we get a chance to get out and talk expose, and encourage folks to actually read the documents, right? Because the truth stands in light. It is only falsehoods and darkness that can't stand the light and examination. So encourage folks to actually read the documents, read what critical race theory is, which is not being taught, but it is this idea of critically examining history, thinking about it, understanding it fully, and not just falling back to tropes and iconography.
Thank you for that. That was very, very important, especially those two powerful quotes. This question is for specifically Board Member Davis and Ms. Grice. Let's talk about the 1836 project. It promotes patriotic education and increases awareness of Texas values. The bill is estimated to cost nearly $2.3 million through the biennium ending August 31st, 2023. Critics of the bill say it's an unnecessary and costly effort to put forth the promotion of Texas history and values because it is a curriculum already studied in public schooling from grades 4 to 7. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So, so this 1836, so this bill was signed into a law. So this one actually is a law now in Texas. And this one is tricky. So it doesn't necessarily change curriculum any type of way. It says that there's going to be a 9-member committee formed. And this committee is going to figure out what the important parts of Texas history is. And they're going to make all these pamphlets, and they're going to put these pamphlets everywhere. So everywhere you go, Department of Motor Vehicles, you're going to get all these pamphlets about all this great Texas history. Well, the 3 people who get to pick out this committee, this panel, are the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker of the House. So, and mind you, these are the 3 folks, well, I'd say 2 of them at least, that's really, really promoting, this Senate Bill 2202. So I can only imagine the folks that they're going to have on there. And even if you look at Project 1836, okay, so they chose that because that's the year of the Texas Constitution being signed. Well, what happened during that, and I'm a native Mississippian, so I did a lot of background to figure this out. Looks like Texas just really wanted slavery to be legal. And when that Constitution was signed, then they said, okay, we want to make sure now we can enslave people. And that's exactly what they did. And even when slavery was ratified in 1865, they said, okay, well, we're not even going to tell y'all. There we go with Juneteenth. And even once we knew we were free, then Texas said, okay, well, we still going to figure out a way to enslave you. We're going to start convict leasing. And so it's been a history, a systematic history of ways to enslave folks. Now, I guarantee that panel is not going to put that in those pamphlets. So we're going to start talking about truth, and we want folks to know about the history of Texas. Then we have to tell the true history of Texas. And that's been the problem going on and moving forward. It's hard to take a critical look at folks who you want to be your heroes and you want to be everybody else's heroes, even though they're really not. And, I was telling somebody the other day, I said, growing up, I learned that Davy Crockett was this huge hero and that he killed a bunch of folks with a knife, even though he killed 15 folks with a knife, even though he had a gun. And then I'm growing, I'm like, okay, I don't think that really happened the way it did. So it's all of these romanticized stories that they want to perpetuate that we're not taking it anymore. We're not having it. We're gonna make sure that students are starting to know some truth.
Just jump in.
Go ahead.
Idea of white kids being angry. They're angry because when they told the truth, they realize they've been lied to. You want your kids to stop being angry? Teach them the truth from the beginning.
Now, one more thing I do want to share, and Councilman Thomas, you mentioned it was going to be a little over $2 million for this project. Even though this is for pamphlets to go around the state, that money is coming from the Texas Education Agency. So money that could be used to pay for teacher salaries, that could be used for all of this learning curve during COVID, for all of the other needs that school districts have. You're going to take $2 million away from TEA to make some pamphlets about this romanticized Texas history. That's a problem.
Wow. Thank you
And
for
it's
sharing
not,
that, Ms.
it's
Rice.
not
And then
even-
I'm also, Dr. Bullock, gonna give you a chance to chime in on that.
No, and everything that you guys are saying is absolutely true. And this bill it's a waste of money because Texas history is already taught in this manner. Like I can't tell you how many teachers I've run across who only know the romanticized version of Texas history, I don't even remember slavery being mentioned when I was in school. I learned that on my own. And I know teachers who get all in they, clutching their pearls whenever you start mentioning that Stephen F. Austin came over here to institute the institution of slavery in Texas, at the old 300 that came over here with enslaved Africans to help them with their fields. And so we want to keep it that whole Lone Ranger, cowboys, and it's just crazy to me that they're going to spend this kind of money to do what they already doing, just to dig their heels in even deeper and say, well, we're going to make sure that y'all know that this is the way that we're going to go, because it's already like that. And another side of that is, if we do want our history to be taught in a different way, teachers have to be trained to do so. Hence where Dr. Bullock and Dr. Goggins and myself and other equity consultants and educators and advocates are here doing on the ground with teachers in the classroom, is we are doing our best to train teachers. Yes, there are some things we're going to have to pick up on our own and do, because you're not going to get it from your administrator. You may not get it from the State Board of Education. If you know what's best for your students, you close that door and you do what you know you're supposed to do, okay? You do what you know you're supposed to do, and that is teach and educate. But we can't teach what we don't know. So if you don't know your Texas history, holla at your girl. I'll hook you up with some resources, okay? consciousandnow.com, and we can take it step by step, okay?
Awesome. Dr. Bullock?
I was going to say, it always amazes me, but not really, at how you can just pull $2 million out and now apply it for some pamphlets, right? And so we have money for what we want to spend the money on, right? That's what you have money for, because in most states, it's like education, budget's underfunded. People don't have enough money to do what they need to do. But now you got $2 million on some pamphlets. And I know my state can't be judging anybody's other state over here in North Carolina. But just wanted to say that, like, we have to resist this, all of it. If we as community members don't resist these types of things, it will keep happening. We have to speak up. We can't allow our fear of backlash, white supremacy gonna white supremacy regardless. So you can be afraid and say nothing, or you can take that fear and turn it into some faith, okay? And then you can be activists and fight against it, because if we don't speak up, it will get worse. It's been worse. We've already we've gone light years in the opposite direction, right? And so we just have to stay vigilant and making sure that as these things come through, that we're pushing back, keep exposing the truth, keep exposing the falsehoods, because otherwise these narratives will take hold. And just going back to, I can't remember, was it Board Member Davis or Sister Grice who said, K-12 educators, many of them didn't even know what critical race theory was. Critical race theory is probably in classrooms more now than it was before then, because of these narratives. And so we have to keep fighting back against the foolishness that we're seeing. And so we cannot, our silence is complicitness. And so we have to use our voices and our power and our privilege with all this education that we have and all these expertise that we have to keep fighting back.
Excellent point. What I want to do is, and I want to be respectful of our time, and this has been a rich conversation. We got a lot of meat within an hour time frame. This is where we give the activists who are watching, our faith leaders, because church is we're gonna start once again having in-person church services, and as well as our community and neighborhood leaders. This is where we give them a call to action. And this is why I need each one of you based on all the information that you've shared tonight, what is the call to action? Someone just posted, you know, how can we stop 2202? I was about to say call the governor's office and let him know that this will be detrimental to Texas, like they like to say, to Texas. What is the call to action? I'm going to start with Dr. Goggins. Tell me, if you could speak to activists, the NAACP, oldest and boldest civil rights organization, what action should members of the NAACP, our Black Greek-led organization, we got to get them off the sidewalk, stop them from strutting, get them out here onto the battlefield with us. What actions, and I is one, okay? I is one. What actions should be taken? I see you, I see you. What actions should be taken first, Dr. Goggins?
I think first and foremost, vote, right? Vote, and vote local. More than anything else, voting for the president is important, all the rest of that kind of stuff. But your council person, your school board member have a greater impact on your life than anybody. Vote and visit them, talk to them about what your issues are. Organize, join an organization that they can strut, but make sure that they do some things that is beyond and connect. And be knowledgeable. When you hear folks talk, and particularly the sound bites, go and talk and learn, Google and search, and get some folks together and have a critical thinking conversation. And then when you know the folks who are lying to you, because what you read doesn't match up with what they're saying, you know who they are. You treat them accordingly. Network. We have easy access to quite literally people around the world. Sometimes it could seem that we are in, isolation is overwhelming. Know that good people are doing good work all the time, and so network and know that not only network with your fellow human beings around you, but know that the work that you're doing is connected to the ancestors and connected to the folks who are not yet here. At some point, somebody's going to look back and hold you accountable for the work that you did, and somebody who's looking from the past is looking forward, and you don't want their work to be in vain.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Bullock?
Yeah, I would say, it was a little harsh on the Greek life, but it's a lot of Greeks out there who put in a lot of work, especially this last election. I know the Deltas were putting in work. I know that Divine Nine was putting in some work trying to get us strutting to the polls, okay? Strutting to the polls. But I would say, one thing that we have to do is recognize that no one person is about to change anything. And so for Black folks, like they say Black don't crack on the outside, but on the inside, right? It's health issues, things are taking a toll on us. And so I just want to say, like, for one, no one person is about to go out here and disrupt and dismantle systemic racism alone. We have to organize, we have to build community, we have to stop being afraid of our own selves, we have to check our own internalized self-hatred, and then we have to go out and build community and be in the community. And we have to know where are your strengths? Where does your power and privilege lie? I tell everybody, do an analysis where many of us have access to power and privilege in different places that we don't even pay attention to, we don't even realize. And we need to see where can we now align our power with someone else's. And now some of us are working in education. Some of us need to be focused on, your county commissioners and your city councils, and other people need to be here. And then we need to see where all of it elapses, because all these overlaps, because the systems are connected. And we really do have to take care of ourselves, right? But we have to be more rooted in our communities and keep organizing and keep uplifting these voices. And we have to We have to stand in the face of white supremacy and keep going and press forward and not fall back to the fear. And the fear is real. I do not want to say that it's imagined, right? This is real fear. And we still have to move forward in the best way that we can. So I highly recognize being in community, joining other organizations. We need to keep reading. I've read so many books this year. The Purpose of Power by Alicia Garza. I'm looking at it right now. And one of the things that she talked about that I'm carrying with me is that she says for these future movements, we might have to organize with folks where we don't see eye to eye on 100%. She said, you know, there's certain organizations that are for social justice, but we have an issue with how they've done one thing or done two things. And she talks about, okay, how about where do y'all overlap and use your power and privilege to move those issues forward? Because of how things are now, none of us are going to 100% agree. But when you have folks who are committed to social justice, we might have one or two things that don't align. Where do we align and use that to move it forward? And I also want to say, like, don't overlook local elections. Local elections matter. You're closest to that power, and your voice matters. And when you're in your community, you all know who to rally around and who to rally against. And don't overlook the power of what city council can do, a school board can do, a board of county commissioners can do, and just stay informed and use those organizing and that community building to help you stay informed. Again, no one person can do this work alone.
Thank you very much for that insight. I'm telling you, we're going to have an action plan when we get off this call. We're going to have an action plan between our education committee and our political action committee. We're going to lay out this plan and we're going to implement it. And before I go to you, because now it's all Texas, it's State Board Member Davis and you, Miss Rites. We've got to. When the call comes for the call session, the special session, we got to have the buses already gassed up. This is where our churches, our community-based organizations are going to come in. We can have the plan and we're ready to implement the plan, but we got to have vehicles that's going to mobilize people to Austin so we can, if we don't go in the Capitol, we just stand out there in numbers about this, about voting rights, and let them know we're not going to tolerate this. And we're here to support you who we elected. So you go in there and handle your business, we're going to stand out here and we're going to hold it down. So that was my Casey hat, my activist Casey hat. I'm sorry. All right, Miss Grice, you're.
So, I mean, I can only piggyback and emphasize the collaboration with the community. I think, especially when you're talking to parents and when you're talking to teachers, I really think that those two groups, we've seen when they come together, stuff happens, right? Schools don't want parents in there banging down their doors. Principals, they don't want to hear that. And they don't want their teachers grumbling either. And so I think if we could do a little bit better to reach out to parents and teachers, keep them informed, because they're kind of the workhorses in the middle of all this, right? Parents have to send their kids to school to learn, teachers have to teach, and we're kind of caught in this crossfire. And so since we are the ones where most of this falls on, I really, really hope that those buses that we are putting together are full of teachers and angry parents, because we know that teachers and angry parents on the other side of the aisle have that backing. That's why these bills just get set on the governor's desk, because those parents who don't want equity initiatives in their schools for some strange reason, they have the backing and they're there with pickets ready to go. And so I know that sometimes that is because of, again, systemic issues where, you know, those parents have a little bit more energy to do that because they don't have nothing else to do. They're not worried about the same kind of things that other parents are. But again, I really hope that we can start reaching out a little bit better to our local communities and informing them, get our pamphlets together start strutting door to door and saying, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing. This is what's important. Will you partner with us and join us? And I guarantee we will start to see greater numbers of those of us who we know are against everything that's going on here, but just don't have the knowledge or the capital really to go and make sure that this stuff happens in our favor, in our children's favor.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for being a part of this discussion tonight. And we end with Board Member Davis.
Sure, I definitely do advise to get ready. Special session is fast and furious. It'll be 1 month. It'll probably be only 1 or 2 days notice if there is a public hearing for the bill. So you have to really be in tune to what's going on, and you got to stay ready. You'll only get 1, maybe 2 public opportunities to testify, and that's it. After that, it's over with. So you got to be prepared. You got to be ready. And like you were saying, get those buses gassed up, just have them ready, just all July, because you never know when it's going to happen, but you just have to stay ready. And one more thing, discover new history. Most of us have been robbed of a true history, and we have to go out and discover and figure out, you know, really what the truth is. So go out and discover history. And when it's time to make those committees so that we start reviewing our history courses, add those little known facts that you don't typically see. Like I said, convict leasing in Texas, the Sugarland 95, all of those discoveries were happening while we were adopting the courses. The bodies and everything was found in 2018. When we were going through the adoption process, I am telling you, discover history and come with those new facts. It's always so exciting when students can be in the middle of it, of a new discovery, and they appreciate it so much. And look out in November, I'm gonna start sending those notices out, and y'all, we need folks at that table. So even if history isn't your expertise, I guarantee you know someone who it is. So get the word out that, hey, Texas will be reviewing every single history course from elementary through high school, every single one of them. So this is that unique opportunity to make sure that we do have some diverse figures and characters, and it will not happen again for another 9 years. So this is the opportunity to get it right now.
Thank you so much for that. Panel, this has been an amazing, I feel so honored to have been chosen to moderate this panel. If it wasn't for COVID, I don't know if we could have pulled this awesome worldwide. This is the best, you are some of the best minds in the country that were all assembled right here. I wish I could just take a picture, just a snapshot of the brain power, social conscious brain power that is right here at this table. That's not the next generation, but the current generation laying the foundation for the next generation. I thank you for this honor, and I turn it back over to Mia, who brought us all together.
I am so proud of the work you all are doing and will do, and thank you so much for your time. I just want to remind all the participants to look for an email. We're going to send out some follow-up emails with a wrap-up of everything we talked about. We see the questions, so we're going to make sure we answer those questions in the email. And don't forget to support, join your local NAACP chapter, and donate. Okay. Thank you all so very much for coming out. We appreciate you. Good night.